Hello and welcome everyone to this very, very special panel. We're proud to have with us some of the finest names from the sphere of art and culture and music and literature and photography here on the stage with us. Now, for too long, we've come to define the successful export of Indian culture by how many Indians line up for the premiere of the latest Bollywood movie in Leicester Square. But increasingly, we've begun to acknowledge that the real definition of Indian excellence in the global cultural sphere would be defined by those like this remarkable panel gathered here. But of course, there's a paradox here, because while we would like to claim them in some way as representatives of India's soft power, some would also argue that artists and scholars and musicians of their caliber are beyond nationality. So joining us to debate all of that is very, very briefly, I mean, it's almost embarrassing to introduce a panel of this eminence, but Anish Kapoor, born in Bombay, but one of the world's foremost artists whose sculptures literally can transform the fortunes of a city. Thank you very much indeed for being here. Zubin Mehta, again, Bombay born, arguably one of the greatest conductors in the world. Thank you, sir, for coming here. Vikram Seth, of course, again, needs no introduction.
Calcutta boy.
Sorry?
Calcutta boy.
Calcutta boy. That's true. We have an inordinately large presence of...
He said nobody's perfect.
Yeah, we have a strong Bombay representation here. Vikram Seth, when Golden Age came out in 1986, it was really the breakthrough work for an entire generation of Indian writers to gain global recognition. Thanks for being here. Dayanita Singh, one of India's leading contemporary photographers. Her work is in the boundaries between photography and art. She's the only Indian artist to have actually had her work shown at London's Hayward Gallery, and she's also recently shown at the Venice Biennale. And last but not the least, another Bombay boy, and the second Parsi on this panel, Homi Bhaba, who's the director of the Humanities Center at the Harvard University, one of the most influential figures in post-colonial studies. He's also a Padma Bhushan awardee, and I might add, somewhat of a guru. Homi, I had the privilege of Homi teaching me at Sussex University very briefly. Thank you all so much for being here. Let me just ask all of you this, starting with you, Anish, that we do like to claim you as our own. We're very good at that in India. And you now are sort of labeled in some sections as an Indian artist. But is that a label that makes you uncomfortable?
On the face of it, of course not. I'm Indian. I mean, I've no problem with that, no issue with that. But I think as artists, we have to ask the question in a different way. It is not Indianness that defines what we do as artists. I would perhaps go so far as to say artists are not born, they're made. In other words, we make ourselves, or we are formed by the milieu in which we allow ourselves to grow.
Right.
So, Indianness is just the background, if you like. We don't say Picasso was a Spanish artist. We don't refer to that as, we say, he was a great artist who found a great creativity. And I think it's the job of the artist to find that creativity. The background is the background. But you would never ask that of an American artist or a French artist or whatever. It seems in today's weird global art world, I think of this as a stigma.
Really?
A problematic stigma. Because
we want labeled on the basis of nationality.
Well, the problem, of course, is that we want to allow the creative to emerge rather than always attribute it to the background culture. What you do in a way, one has to remember the background for this is that, especially in the art world, this is a place of individuals.
Right.
And it's individual creativity that we celebrate. Now, of course, it has roots in, it's well rooted in Indianness, in a formal language of international endeavor, whether it's in sculpture or in painting or whatever else. And all of those things feed what one can allow oneself to be.
So, but tell me, when you started off creating art, and this was in the late 70s and 80s in England, you left India fairly early on. Were those categories being applied to you then? I mean, today you are ranked as one of the world's greatest artists, so nationalities don't matter. But at that time, was there some of that? Because I can't imagine there being too many artists of Indian origin.
Well, there were two things. I was working in England. I was a young artist. So the work that I made then was, two things happened with it. One was that it was labeled Indian, which I didn't like, and the other is that I was labeled a woman, in that Anish Kapoor to an English audience might be a woman's name. I love that, I've got to say. So, no, what I mean by it, though, is that all of these things are kind of irrelevant. They're not the real issue. I think we do, and I've fought against it quite hard, because I don't feel that a kind of exotic, at least viewed in the West, a kind of exotic background does something helpful to the creative process or to the witnessing of it.
So, okay, let me then flip it and look at it from our point of view, or from the Indian point of view, where we see all of you who've moved on and who've become globally recognized, not on basis of ethnicity, but on basis of your work. But we see you as representatives, in a sense, of Indian soft power. Is that even fair to sort of yoke that mantle onto you? As a way of opening up the doorway for others who might be doing art or music or whatever from here?
I suppose it's fair. It's okay. It's good. It's part of the deal in a way. I think but somehow one has to navigate this space between the national and, if you like, the cosmopolitan, the international.
Right.
In the 70s, I think I'm not wrong in saying that that was relatively soon after independence. Indian artists were very concerned about making something that they could define as an Indian art.
Right.
We are no longer in that place. It seems, we are self-confidently Indian. We know what that is. We don't need to explain it to anybody else. And, how dare they ask us, frankly.
Right.
So from that place, we know that then the resource that's left is one of inventiveness, this thing we call creativity or whatever it is. And that's a bumbling, evolving process. It doesn't always have, a singular route.
All right. Zubin Mehta, now, you, of course, are truly a citizen of the world, but fir bhi dil hai Hindustani, right? And you just said that as well in the previous panel. But again...
Dil to Hindustan ka hai.
Dil Hindustani.
That's no problem. Unfortunately,
yes,
the music that I interpret has been written for the last 500 years by Europeans.
True.
So there's no way I could inject anything Indian into it except the yoga that I used to do as a youth that helps me breathing techniques when I conduct the first act of Wagner's Götterdämmerung, which lasts for 2 hours. I have to know how to breathe, otherwise I get a nervous breakdown. So that's about it. Otherwise, that part of me, my Indian part, does not enter my spirituality on stage.
fair enough.
Yeah.
But in terms of the kind of support or the ecosystem that allowed you to become Zubin Mehta, for that too you felt that you had to leave India, that it wasn't possible, even in a city like Bombay, which has a strong tradition of Western classical music.
Today one
thanks
has
to
to
your
leave
father.
India in the same... I'm trying to build in Bombay
Yes.
a school of Western music. It's in its infancy just now. Hopefully there will be a school to produce musicians who can stay here and study. At the moment, we are teaching kids the rudiments. But if you really want to study seriously today, Western music, you will have to leave India for a certain amount of time.
And even to
There's no
perform
question.
music, as you were telling me, that even for when you come down, because you have been generous enough to come down with all the different orchestras that you've played with, but venues are a problem in India, even now?
Well, look at the nation's capital. Isn't it a disgrace that there is no concert hall in Delhi? It's a disgrace. Look at China and Japan and Korea.
Yeah.
And I think it's about time that we built a concert hall. But I don't mean for classical Western music. I mean for Indian music, for Indian natak, for everything concerning India. And Calcutta has no real concert hall either. And
Only Bombay,
Bombay
to that extent,
has a very
the
good
NCPA
one.
you find is
Bombay
up
is
to
a
standards.
very good concert hall.
But barring that, nothing.
No, unfortunately.
And you're finding as you travel
You know,
around
in
the world.
China, there's an explosion going on. In Korea, too. When was your last major exhibition in India of your works?
I've only ever done
Last
one
year.
in
One.
Delhi 2 years ago. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
But I think the point you make is a very important one. Institutionally, we are so poor, you know, in the visual arts, just as in music.
Yes.
And until, as I said earlier on, artists are made, not born.
So you do need
Institutions help to make.
But where would be Vikram without India? Now we're going on.
That's what. Well, I wanted to ask him that.
He feeds on.
No, but Vikram, tell me. I mean, when it comes to literature, we now have, at last count, I was discussing this with Dayanita, almost 60 literary festivals, I'm told, including one in Patna and 2 in Chandigarh. And you are largely responsible for this. To an extent.
Please, sir, I didn't do it. No, I mean,
But do you find that at least in the sphere of literature,
Yeah.
that the kind of recognition that we have managed to achieve over the past decade or so has not necessarily just been of those who have had to leave the country? I mean, though Golden Gate was written in San Francisco, but now you have enough writers producing work here and outside of it?
Well, you know, Patna is a city that's very dear to me. And in fact, Brahmpur, I lived in Patna between the ages of 6 and 16. In fact, Patna is the hub of the universe. Since the friends that our family made here, and my mother's in the audience and as well, she, you know, the friends that you made there basically lasted our family 30 years. We do make new friends, but somehow Patna is it. Now, Patna was the basis of Brahmpur in some sense, but other cities like Allahabad, Banaras, Agra, Purani Delhi took some kind of role as well. But if you look at the Sabzi-Por club on the Ganga, it's really the Bankipur club. That's a little side remark. As far as the question, and I must tell everyone that I was kidnapped yesterday and told I would sit on this panel, so I haven't had time to think anything through, let alone questions of soft power. But as far as the basic question of Indians claiming Indian scientists, Indian artists, and so on, I agree with everyone here that we are happy to be claimed as long as it isn't a constraint. But we are not happy to be disclaimed, like M.F. Hussain was.
Yes.
That is something that we do. We are quite happy to claim the successful, but if they do anything to offend someone, we do not afford them the protections that they need. He was not able to rest his dying head in his own homeland. We should hang our heads in shame.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to come to that later about whether the political environment of producing art and creativity in India is one of the reasons which limits. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to continue with a couple of points that you asked me or that came up. And I do hope we continue with that subject as well.
Yes.
But to the point, so to speak, the question about laying your Indianness on thick. Now, like Anish, I agree that in the first few years after independence, partly because of a natural lack of confidence, because all the models that you had, because you see a kind of involuntary, not abasement exactly, but a sort of over-adulation of other people, and the reaction to it, which is you want to show, that there's something in our tradition going back and interpreted now. You may have wanted to concentrate on those aspects. They have a universality. There's no question about that. But there's also the danger that you could be seen. Am I still on?
Yeah.
Okay. There is a danger that you could be seen to overemphasize something for reasons that do not emerge from the inspiration of the art itself. Now, something like a festival is a public event. Something like this is a public event. Something like Amazon and discussions of your book or book groups up. But eventually, art is, I'm not necessarily talking about performance arts, but the reading, displaying arts are things that are so private. They're written by a person, he or she is in a room. It's read by a person, he or she says, look, hey, wait, keep dinner for me, I'm reading. That is what really matters. If you're claimed by people who feel that your art amuses them, moves them, makes you think, that to me is where the essence of art is. And it seems to me, as a kind of corollary of that, that your art must be true and believed by the people about whom you are writing and whose lives you're trying to explain. It's no good. My book on, say, 1980 San Francisco was praised in England or India or even on the East Coast if it was not believed by the people who live in that city.
Right. So
it's no good writing A Suitable Boy and getting plaudits anywhere as long as it isn't believed by people who've lived in 50s India.
Right.
No point writing a book about a string quartet if a musician says, hey, but you're playing on the wrong string. It has to be simultaneously born of the place, essential to the place, and strangely enough, indirectly, if it has any merit at all, it becomes universal.
Okay.
Not because you're striving for it.
Okay. Dayanita, now, as all of them have said, that there is something deeply individual about art, but at the same time, there are occasions on where you get that nationality, or at least contextualized in that nationality. Now, it was interesting, and we were talking about this earlier, that you showed at the Venice Biennale, but you were showing in the German Pavilion. Now, this was because India couldn't get its act together and get a pavilion in place?
No, I think the German curator thought that nationality was really not relevant in art practice today, and so she wanted to invite artists that she thought had some connection with Germany, and so that's how she put the group of artists together. But it was a great honor to be there and to be on the hill with Germany, France, and Britain. And very, very sad for the next question to always be, but where's your Indian pavilion? And while I can be very vocal about why we didn't have an Indian pavilion here, I would just look away and, how could you say we couldn't get our acts together, or our institutions, the few institutions we have are run by bureaucrats. We don't have an arts council. We don't have artists other than in an advisory committee at the NGMA.
Right.
So
what happened? Why couldn't we get an Indian pavilion together? Because we had one earlier, yes? There was one
we
a
had
few
one
years
in
ago.
2011, which Ranjit Hoskote curated.
Yes.
And 2013, we couldn't get a letter out just to agreeing to
A letter from?
the culture department. And I believe Mr. Kalyan Chakravarti says that we will be represented in the next Venice Biennale. I think it's, in terms of global, it's very important to be at the Venice Biennale. I'm completely not in favor of nationality-based art at the same time.
Okay.
And I have always seen that as a burden for myself, and have worked quite hard to sort of say, look at my work and just forget about my nationality.
Okay, so then why do we then need a presence at the
The Venice Biennale, unfortunately, the way it's structured is about nationalities, different nationalities bringing in their work. But it's the place where you would have the greatest visibility. So if India wanted to talk in terms of having a global presence, that is one place, and the large museums is another place, to have a network of...
So Homi, is that the problem, that India wants to have these aspirations of being a global cultural power as well, but is not willing to invest in the kind of institutions and in creating the kind of ecosystem that will foster this sort of talent?
Well, first of all, if you want to have influential soft power, you have to have infrastructure.
Right.
And I think we do not have the kind of cultural infrastructure. I know there are people who've tried very hard to provide it, my friend here, but I mean, it is very difficult to do it without it. I mean, even if you think of infrastructure like the CIA, when they had Encounter magazine, which we all used to read, you know, they put a lot of money into producing CIA, which we know with abstract expressionists. The Americans at one point sent, you know, made a political project.
Yes.
Now, it is a politicization of art, but I'm saying if you want soft power, it's not a kind of cuddly thing. You've got to have the infrastructure to do it.
Right.
But can I just go back for a moment
Yes.
to your question about nationality, which, you know, you were one of my very best students, but I think nationality is a bit of a red
I'm
herring.
worried what's coming now?
No, nationality is, I think, you know, there is a scale which is not the national scale and not the global scale, which we all relate to, which is the city. And if you asked any of us,
Yes.
you know, how do you feel you represent India? I think it would be difficult to accept in a certain official discourse. But if I think of my work, the cosmopolitan experience of Bombay has carried with me all through my life.
Right.
Bombay was a deeply cosmopolitan place. And that, I think, is very, very important.
But
When we talk
yeah.
about great
Sure.
coteries of culture,
Yes.
what we actually talk about, London in certain period, Paris, New York, Tokyo. So I think the ways in which cities mix things up,
Yes.
the national, the regional, the international, that's where you look for a location,
can I-
not a nation.
That's a good point. Can I just get Anish on that, about the idea of cosmopolitanism as an important climate in which to create art? But given what Vikram was saying, that there's also this worry of rising intolerance of the kind that we've seen with Hussein. Was that something which was a great source of distress to you?
Hugely so. I mean, I think artists always dare, or must dare, to enter even slightly difficult political questions. Not that what Hussein did was that drastic, in fact.
Not in the least.
I mean, not in the least. So that he was, to his dying day, ostracized, to our eternal shame. But I think the point that's being made here about institutional, I think it comes back to that again, though, in a way. Even this question of the politics comes back to the institutional.
On the politics, before on the institution, let me just ask you, because you've been actually fairly outspoken about the political transformations that are happening here, and particularly with Narendra Modi. You know, you've spoken about this largely in the UK, so I don't know how many people here are aware of that. But what are your concerns with what you're seeing happening politically and with the rise of Narendra Modi?
Let's be clear about this. You know, many of us on this panel, I mean, Vikram just the other day very boldly speaking out about the Supreme Court judgment on gay rights and so on and so forth. So I think these are questions that are there for all of us as human beings.
Yes.
The fact that we may you know, have a little prominence perhaps gives us a different kind of voice.
Yes.
And I think on different issues we speak, and it's okay to speak. I think it's right to speak. It's necessary to speak. I don't really believe in agitprop as a way of the artist. I mean, I feel it's a very problematic thing.
Yes.
However, of course, making art is deeply political. Not
What is
only
it that's agitating you about Modi?
I'm not going to be drawn on that on this panel. I don't feel that's right. Not on this panel. I
All
don't
right.
feel that's right. I'll talk to you about it another time.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're here to discuss culture, and I want to hold it to that. I feel that's a very, very important question.
Well, it is part of the context of producing art or culture in a climate of political tolerance or intolerance. So I was asking you there.
But you
more
see
from
the
that
point.
point of view.
Well,
And
well,
I
the
assume
point.
that that's where you're coming from as
Well,
well.
the point I'm trying to make here is that when we have institutional realities that say that artists have a voice in this place or that place. I mean,
Yes.
literary festivals are interesting because they are generated by writers themselves, by people who are concerned, if you like, in a literary forum. Artists can't do that.
Okay.
Big orchestras can't do that. The institutions have to provide them, have to be provided by some other force. We can lend a voice to it, but we can't make it happen.
Okay, on that note,
And
let
it's
me-
not just international. I
Right.
think it's national first and then international.
Okay.